I'm going to go out on a limb and say this is my favorite episode of PODLOMATIC so far. That isn't because any other conversations on this channel are any less meaningful than they are. This one burrowed so deep, though, it seemed as if my guest and I hit the absolute bedrock of where you can go with the conversation like this. We touched the nerve core, the absolute foundation of what art is, why our species absorbs and produces it. Did you know that if you smile at a child, they'll smile back? It seems like an obvious question, but have you thought about why? I mean, children don't know what smiling is, and yet they feel happy when someone is in front of them smiling. When you look into a baby's eyes, they'll look into yours. When you make a gesture, like raising your hand, they'll do it too. Humans, even babies, learn, it seems, by emulation. Nobody tells them to do this. It's programmed into our DNA. This is called the mirror reflex. It's tied to the ability to read emotions that are projected at you. By mirroring them, imagining what it's like to have them, now you can feel emotions that others are feeling too. If you see someone fall down and get hurt, for example, you might feel bad for them. People with high empathy might even feel a sort of phantom pain themselves. If you're a martial artist and see a cool move, you might want to try it out with your own body, and then by repetition, you learn it. This is the key of storytelling in any language, visual or audible. Text, pictures, sound. There are many dimensions of storytelling. The oldest is the spoken word. Next is the written word, or pictures. If you use the written word, you will have a novel. If you have only pictures, you might have a painting. Combine these two in a sequence representing time, and you have a comic. If you add sound and motion, we have invented film, animation. Add interactivity to the mix, and you have video games. Comics only represent two of these storytelling dimensions, but it's not a medium that should be underestimated. It's versatile, relatively inexpensive to produce, and even a child can read them, if at a lower resolution. Combining words and pictures is a potent tool of portraying moments in time, of delivering messages through time and place. A great comic from 100 years ago is still potent today. No compatibility problems to speak of. Maybe that's why the medium has endured so many catastrophic events here in the West. There is something about it that just works for our brains. Each page of a well-made comic is like a zip file containing a wealth of meaningful information, a combination of arranged slashes of ink and blobs of pixels that, when encoded by an author, can construct a wellspring of exponential meaning when decoded by a reader. Like a sheet of paper that unfolds and unfolds again, getting bigger and bigger every time. A well-made comic can change lives. If there was a fire and you could only grab one handful of comics off your shelf to save, the most meaningful ones to you, which would they be? Why? Which comics have endured the test of time, still finding new readers after decades, even across language barriers? That is only some of what my guest and I discussed over the course of a very short hour. His name is TenNapel, and he is as close to a comics pro as you can find in America today. A true veteran. If you name any aspect of creation in this industry, he's done it at least twice. He has been a writer, cartoonist, animator, publisher for decades. Everyone listening would of course know him as the creator of Earthworm Jim, which is in itself a great honor to talk to and listen to him. But he has not stopped drawing at all since the inception of that iconic character, creating dozens of books and planning dozens more before he even thinks of retiring. This guy is the real thing, and he plans to finish strong. Talking to him as a junior creator, fumbling my way through this vocation, my only thought is about how quickly I can upload this video and go for a long walk to think about what we discussed. We only have so many years to live, right? What will we spend them doing? What works of quality, excellence, and passion will we put into the world? What legacy will we construct for ourselves? What books bearing our names will we place onto the bookshelves of history? Doug and I agreed that we want to do the absolute best work we can, even if that means getting our butts kicked in the short term. Doug is a man who keeps his eye on the horizon, which I find admirable and respectable, something I want to emulate, mirror, if you will. One last note before we jump into the conversation. On the subject of excellence, I want to remind everyone that the Kickstarter for Earthworm Jim Book 1 is concluding this Sunday. That means all of you, as of right now, listening to this video that's been uploaded today, you might have less than 48 hours to grab a copy of what many people are saying is the best indie book of the year. I'll be buying my copy tomorrow for sure, and I encourage all of you to do the same. It may not be available any other way. Anyhow, Doug's going to tell you more about it as we talk. Also, Doug's got a YouTube channel where he documented the production process of Earthworm Jim, which I highly recommend everyone check out. There will be links for these in the description, as well as a link to my latest book, Mary Sue, Volumes 1 and 2, also on Kickstarter, which I hope you guys check out as well. And that's it for now. I hope you guys enjoy this very, very special episode of PODLOMATIC. All right, hit record. I'm making sure the file's good to go. Okay, I'll start real quick. Hey everybody, this is episode 40, I think, of PODLOMATIC, the show where I talk to creative people about what makes them tick. Today's guest is especially high honor, needs no introduction, but I'll ask him to introduce himself anyway, and then we'll go nuts.
The most PODLOMATIC thing I can think of is pronouncing the name of your show. That's the most horrifying thing I can.
It
is truly problematic.
Dad jokes, and I'm not even a dad yet.
That's right.
But Doug TenNapel, please. I don't even know where to start, but gosh, I guess. Well, first we wanted to talk about your Kickstarter, which is ending on Sunday, I think.
That's right. Sunday night.
Okay.
There's about, I think, 57 hours left or something, but it's the last chance people have to get that Alejandro print that is dedicated just to that campaign. And it's a beautiful work of art, and everyone who gets a book gets that print. And if you look at it, it's beautiful. So okay. I'm excited about that.
Of course, I'll have the links in the description.
Okay.
Are the prints, the books themselves and all the other goodies, is it similar or the same as what was on the Indiegogo?
Yeah.
Okay.
Not for the single book tier. I don't have the expanded goodies on it. I just felt like people needed to come in deeper than that to get those, because those were all part of another campaign.
Yeah. But
I'll offer them on higher end tiers. That's fine.
Okay.
So similar goodies, the exact same books. So all the gold, the gilded edges and the embossing and all that is the same. Because it's the tail end of the print run.
I see.
This is basically where my profit margin lies.
Okay, yeah. That is something I wanted to ask about, was your experiences with production. Of course, anyone who's listening, I'll leave links to his channel. He has been walking around interviewing people at the production facilities. It's an amazing sort of documentary style of how it's done.
I'm making movies I wish other people made for me when I started out.
Yeah.
So like, how do you do it? How do you print? Why make a book? Why tell a story? What makes them great? All that stuff are things that I think I could help some up and comers, even new people who are older, who want to get into writing or whatever. I think I can help them out with some of what I've learned.
It's been amazing to see the just how enormous these machines are and how complex it all is. And I mean, it's amazing to think just to go from even a printer from home, a little laser printer that anyone can buy, to these enormous, like they build buildings for these machines.
Yeah, this is a 2-mile facility. It's the largest printing company in the United States. With the, that's first of all, the printer I have sitting over there, that Epson Workforce, is the greatest printer that money can buy as far as consumer grade. It puts out work that, printing presses would do. They used to only be available to pros. and I got that thing for $150. So that technology is coming cheaper, and I know that you've done home printing, and I think it's what you did was great. I think that's a valid art form to do. I think, and I came from self-publishing back when I was in middle school and high school. You know, we would use the mimeograph machine, or we would use carbon. I did my first comics I did on carbon paper. I would put the carbon paper down and I'd draw an original comic on top of it, and it would make a copy underneath. And I sold the original and the copy for 25 cents each.
High school, you said?
That was probably middle school. I started in about, I think that was around 5th or 6th grade that I started doing that. And by middle school, you know, I would do multiple pieces of carbon paper and push down really hard to make more copies, and by then the price was going up to 50 cents.
They say, I guess, if you show entrepreneurial spirit at that age, you're going to be in good shape when you get older.
Yeah, it's not, and of course I didn't do it for the money, but because it just wasn't enough money. I'd make more money mowing lawns.
Yeah.
And I mowed lawns too. So, but it was more, the people who bought the comics it was a form of respect that they were saying, I like your work. And they would ask me, you know, where's my comic? And they'd hold up a quarter, you know, they were ready.
That's something I actually share that. I didn't sell any comics, but all throughout middle school and high school, I knew that this was for me because that's all I did all the time. And especially at the lunch table, my friends would say, what's the next part of the story? What are you doing next?
Yeah.
And their excitement was so contagious. Did you know?
They're fans. They love reading. People love reading comics.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite genres is zines. So you photocopy one 8.5 by 11 piece of normal photocopy paper. These are black and white, the zines. And you print both sides, you know, and then you fold them up 16 ways. You fold them once, you get 2, twice, 3 times, you know, and then you staple the edge and trim the edge of it.
Yeah.
That's a zine. That has a huge, rich culture that goes all the way back to the 60s in America. Is the zine culture was when kind of the underground of comics came. And that's where, like, I read in the 80s, I remember reading like little, you know, punk rock zines out of San Francisco in the UK because they were cheap to make. You'd photocopy, double-sided copy page, and those are great comics. They can just be a little gag on each page or a goof around thing or whatever. But I've seen one of my favorite all-time comics is a zine called Applicant that came out, I'd say, in the early 2000s. One of the funniest things I've ever seen. So I'm just saying, I always feel like if I lost all my money at these big giant books, I'd just go back to making zines because no one can stop you from making what you want to make.
Yeah, it's even back then, I suppose it was very much about the what we would say now is indie comics and alternative comics. There's no one that you have to ask for permission to do. There was a lot of lewd stuff as well, but
that's oh yeah, a lot of it was. I mean, but that's also while I find that immoral, lewd stuff.
Yeah,
it's not. It's marketing. So you look at campaigns where it's basically a girl with big boobs on the front cover on a campaign. It's free marketing because, gee, I wonder if people are going to buy that or not. And I don't see that as entirely immoral if it's beautifully drawn. You know, it's no different than the Coca-Cola girls or Gibson girls for their time, or the Coke Santa Claus. You know, this is imagery and feelings and things that are tapping deep into people.
So you would
object. It's not what I do.
It's sort of like the difference between if you go to a museum, there's something about the human experience that you can, as a creator, we would say, this is beautiful and I want to show other people something that I've seen.
Right.
As opposed to just the sort of cheapening of something that I would say is sacred.
Right. So
it needs to be held with respect.
Yeah. So just apply that, George, to everything.
Sure.
So apply that same, because that philosophy, I think, actually is really true. Well, one of many truths, right?
Yeah.
That you can cheapen something, and if I invite you over my house, you know, I can cook for you and make you a crafted meal, or I can go by McDonald's and lay it out in front of you. You might actually be morbidly obese and prefer McDonald's, but it doesn't make it true or the best cuisine. You know what I mean? There's like a respect in there that I think we're missing, especially in comics, because it's such a pedestrian art form that it's not, you know, this isn't literature. It is, but people just don't treat it that way. And our culture isn't that far along in comics and has a long way to grow.
Okay. I do want to ask about that too, because you're going to Japan soon, right?
Yeah.
One of the biggest things that I always think about is the differences between the comics cultures between the West and the East.
Yeah.
Over there, there's genres for everything. There's comics about cooking, about relationships, and there's comedy over here, and there's every genre in the world. My theory lately is I read a book called The 10-Cent Plague about the comics code and the culture that caused it to be made in the first place.
Yeah.
And I would say that because of those years, we're maybe 30 years behind in terms of...
By the way, I 100% disagree with anything blaming the comics code for anything. That's my view of history, is that is entirely made up by SJWs and targeting them for that reason. And the same thing with the people that push funding the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund.
Okay.
It's all paranoid garbage, and it's not true in general. It's not true in general. So I don't believe it put us, and I've heard that floated around now that we're 30 years behind from that theory.
Okay. Well, would you say then that there's a lot of room to grow here in the West compared
100%.
to
100%.
Obviously in the past few years, like you'll go to Barnes and Noble and they are stacked to the ceiling with all kinds of Eastern books, and the West is sort of catching up. And of course, looking at your bibliography, I can see that your subject matter is all over every genre too.
Yeah.
So in some ways, you've been still pioneering the Western version of every genre.
Yeah.
How do you think
I just see books as it's literature. It's another form of storytelling. And if I sat you down and said, Doug, tell me a story. To me, it would be very strange if all of my stories were like if I was H.P. Lovecraft and they were all mysterious octopus monsters or whatever.
Yeah.
And when my kids ask me for a story, I might say, well, once upon a time in the Old West, you know, there was a robot covered in rust. Or I might say, deep in space, there were 4 children who were owned by a spacecraft. You know, so to me, the start of a story is kind of the first point of interest where you pull people in. I see it really eclectic things like come from Disney is that way. If you look back on Disney's, he didn't just, there's a huge difference between Snow White and Pinocchio, and a huge difference between Pinocchio and Dumbo, and a huge difference between Dumbo and Peter Pan, and 101 Dalmatians. So even though he was doing family animated fairy tales, those are really eclectic stories. And I really like the Coen brothers for the same reason. They attack genres. They don't go, well, everything we do, you know, we did Blood Simple, everything's film noir. But they took the best ideas from film noir and you'll see them reapply it to their future work. So that's kind of what I'm doing. I explore genre because I'm really, people have asked, you know, what kind of if I could write a script, any script, I would want to try a romantic comedy, a straight up romantic comedy with just humans.
Drawn in the normal style that you...
For a movie script. I mean, if I was going to, because I write movie scripts also, I'm just saying, if I was going to write something, if I was going to choose a genre, I'd go, I'm going to try a rom-com.
I always think of graphic novels as sort of like a cousin to film. Would you ever consider drawing a script like that? Writing and drawing?
I would, but, you know, Matt Weldon would be a lot better at drawing. I think. I'm not that good with the human form. I'd really have, in fact, that would be part of the challenge would be I'd have to really brush up on my human anatomy and really do a little better, you know?
Oh man.
But yeah, that would be an easy book, a fine book to write. It would probably only expand my audience because I think more normies want normal stories.
I think that's where all the room to grow is. Like the
Yeah.
superhero types, it's oversaturated and it's not that big of a market. But I think manga has proven that there is a hunger for different genres.
Yeah.
And especially like even romantic comedies, romance, like high school-ish age romance, that sort of thing. That was when I was in high school blowing up. So those people have grown up and they'll read it. And I know younger people read it.
Or even take a movie like Fast Times at Ridgemont High. That would be a YA book. You know what I mean? Why does everything have to be lizards, robots, and capes?
Yeah, I really want to see. I guess what we need is trailblazers, more American types. I mean, there was Scott Pilgrim that I talk about often.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, that's a good.
Yeah, and everybody
he's a good
liked
genre
it.
bender and a killer writer and great artist.
It did so good, and I guess we haven't seen a lot of follow-ups to that, and I'm always curious why, and maybe it has to do with the existing structures for production and publication. Oni Press is over there, you know, Image, Dark Horse, and those guys.
Yeah, and everyone's barely hanging on as it is.
Right. Oh, yeah. All the publishers are, from what I've heard, not doing great, and they don't pay their authors very much either.
Yeah, so if you look at what happened to video games, I mean, the cost went up to make a video game, and suddenly everyone's only doing sequels and war simulators and John Madden football because you get more cautious when you get beaten down for taking a risk. Mm-hmm. And so I think the same thing in publishing. I don't see any of us living up to our charter of the kind of risk we should be taking with a medium as inexpensive as drawing, and it's probably even less expensive to write books, novels. So you'll see probably more experimentation and creativity in that world than in comics even.
Yeah, I mean, game development, both of us have worked in games development, and I want to ask about that, but that's very expensive because I think I read a book saying that it's $10,000 per month per person for a project these days.
Yeah.
And for us to have to have my butt in my seat at my desk, there's a certain amount of money I would like to have per day just to survive.
Yeah.
And for comics...
Well, and you could, my buddy Ethan Nicole found out, when he was at the peak of Axe Cop fame, he realized like if he put the same amount of hours at being a Starbucks barista, he'd make about the same as what he made on Axe Cop, having his own TV show, having a #1, very top web comic that people just don't want to work at Starbucks.
Yeah.
And then make it sound like not working at Starbucks is like their calling.
It's funny. I realized there was I think it was exactly 6 years ago, when I quit my printing job and I decided to do freelancing full time because I realized I was making the exact same amount of money.
Yeah.
But the printing job was sort of a dead end. Like I wasn't going to get promoted. So I said, why not just do comics and games full time? And there, at least I have growth.
There can be huge upside.
Yeah. I mean, with freelancing, I'm sure you're the last person I need to tell this to.
That's right.
There's these spikes and then huge dips of nothing.
That's right.
And I'm learning, of course, that having savings is so important because that's padding for the dry times.
Yeah. And I'm one of the most successful creators as far as creating IP and selling them there is in comics. And it's very tough. It's a tough line. It is not a dream job. It's not easy. It is fun, but it's very risky. Especially I have a wife and 4 kids.
Yeah.
That it kind of ups the stakes a lot more.
And I'm sure it takes an unbelievable amount of discipline because if I tell people I work from home, I don't think they know what that means.
Yeah, they picture you streaming videos.
Yeah, and I don't know. I don't go outside anymore. I don't have time.
Too. Yeah,
I can go outside, but that means I don't make any money.
Yeah, to me, it's the white knuckle discipline for me is to go see a movie. Is what requires
to give yourself breaks.
Yeah, most people go and do that, and they discipline themselves to get to the art table and draw. I have to discipline myself to go and see some blockbuster that everyone else has already seen.
Well, it's good because for creativity, we need fuel as well.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we'll just be making the same stuff.
Yeah.
On that note, how many hours a day lately have you been spending at your desk?
I would say on average 10 hours a day.
Okay. Do you
Monday through Saturday.
Wow. Is that like what's your daily routine like? Do you take breaks? When is your best time to draw?
Early morning is good. I usually get up. I was getting up at 4:30 last year, and this year I've been getting up at about 5:30. By 6, I'm dressed and at my table. In this case, this is actually my easy time because I just finished Bigfoot Bill 2 a week or two ago. So I'm in the easy phase. So I'm just writing Earthworm Jim 2 note cards here. I've got there's like, I don't want to show you my table because I don't want to give away the plot, but I mean, sure. There's cards spread all over this table, stacks of them. And I'm working out the structure of the story right now. And so that's easy work to sit here at a table for 10 hours and take lots of breaks. I mean, I'll walk around and look for any excuse, to get out there to my house, pet the cat, talk to Angie, talk to the kids for about 5 minutes each, come back in here, work an hour, go back out, go get a coffee. So it's 10 hours, but it's punctuated with, part of writing is finding a pleasurable way to be distracted that doesn't completely take you out of the project. And that allows me to write longer.
The best thing about writing is that you don't have to necessarily be at your desk to do it.
That's right.
Walking for me is my best motivate. It just gets my brain going.
Yeah.
I'll listen to some music. I'll go to the mall. I'll go to the park. And then I always bring my laptop and notepads to sit.
Very good stuff.
Yeah.
Yep. By the way, and most writers I know, that is a very positive work environment for them.
I mean, it's funny because ever since even middle school, high school, I've never not carried a bag with me, sketchbooks, something to write with, because you never know when an idea is going to come to you.
That's right.
So you showed me, this is audio only, but for anyone listening, you showed me some of your note cards there.
Oh, yeah.
What's the process there when you're writing a story? Do you carry your note cards and say, oh, I want to do a scene where he punches, a crow, and you put it somewhere in the pile? How do you do that?
I do that last. So that would be one of my last phases in the note cards is stuff I really want to do, and I don't care about structure. The first round of note cards is structure only and no candy. So I'll go in and say, this is what has to happen beginning, middle, end for this thing to have a moral, humane, relevant center, which is a spine. And I think philosophically justifies the entire book. Okay. So if I cover that, right, necessary, moral, humane story, suddenly it doesn't matter if I go, now I want to put in a crow fight, right?
I see.
I can put that crow fight anywhere. The structure's there. It doesn't ruin the structure. I don't have to judge myself and say, is this right or is this wrong? It's just kind of, dude, if you want a car wreck in there, if you want a car chase, throw the car chase in. And as long as you return back to your structure, you have a story.
I see.
So the last pass, I'll do eye candy stuff that I really, really want to put in. And it's guilty pleasure. And I can shoehorn that thing in anywhere in the plot.
So I think that's also a move of a veteran because you know that you can make set pieces look fun.
That's right.
That's sort of like the frosting on the cake, but you want to make sure that the cake is substantial.
That's right. The substance is, if I were to give you like the core outline of what Back to the Future about, I may not even bring up a time machine.
Okay.
That's the skin. It's what's going on at the heart of Marty McFly's plight is the humane part of that. Or in Iron Giant, it may not involve a robot. That could be a homeless guy that comes in. I might choose to put on the skin of a homeless guy, comes and visits him and saves the world instead of a giant robot. But the human core is, I think, what moves people, because we don't have an affinity. We don't have an attraction to a big metal robot. If you told people that, you know, or a time machine, that's neat candy and that's frosting. A time machine alone is not what sustains a story. Seeing a robot walk by is not what sustains a story.
It's a good hook, but it's not the substance.
Yeah, and so if you're going to compare, say, a movie with heart like Star Wars and compare it to a movie without heart that's a mess like Battlefield Earth, there's something about Star Wars that is great about it beyond the Millennium Falcon. Millennium Falcon is perfect frosting, but something about the heart of that story is, and I'm saying you have to write that story first. Mm-hmm. Instead of hoping you find it and luck out at the end.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
A big giant sweeping story about a farm boy, you know, who goes on the adventure of his life and ends up saving the world from this, you know, evil, totalitarian, overwhelming force. Mm-hmm. I just think that story needs to be written first, because that's the thing that justifies the whole thing.
I see. And it's, wow, there's so many.
Aliens could have been in Nazi Germany. Ripley could have been a Jewish woman or whatever, you know. Didn't have to be alien. Mm-hmm. So I'm just saying the heart of what a story is, that DNA, no one talks about it because I think people are ignorant of it. And I think it's the majority of what people are jiving with when they see a story, or when a story kind of falls flat and you kind of go, that didn't quite, you know, Black Panther was good, but it didn't quite stick the landing, you know. Or you can give them enough frosting that they don't care, like Great Frosting, you know, Thor Ragnarok. It's just so funny. Mm-hmm. Who cares? You know?
I see. Yeah, there's a lot of stories where I think the best value is when I rewatch it 5 times, 10 times, and I'm still getting juice out of it.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's the thing is, and there is such a thing as great frosting too. We like seeing great car chases and stuff like that. But I just think there's something at the core of, say, The Matrix, about Neo, and the reason why we use the word red pilled. We're talking about something really big, mm-hmm. That's bigger than just, oh, they had great kung fu.
Yeah, it sort of goes into what the meaning of the word meme is, and its origin also. If I don't remember, Richard Dawkins it was. I don't particularly subscribe to anything he says, but he coined the word meme as in gene for something that passes between people. And it's also, it reminds me of like zip files. A meme, a really good meme, has so much density in it that when you unpack it, it like turns into this, it keeps folding and opening and opening and opening, like a zine, let's say. Yeah. And I realized comics is also that. When you combine words and pictures, and people can impose their own meaning and reference it with memories and all kinds of things. That's why it's such a powerful and in some ways dangerous medium. I can see why some people would want to censor or control it. Yeah. It's so elementary. Even kids can read a comic. I can read a comic in Japanese and not understand the language, but I can still see what the panels, between the panels, I can still see what the story is.
Yeah, good visual storytelling. You should be able to tell something about what's going on.
Yeah. And a lot of, oh man, there's so many things I want to ask you. But, all right, so production. Yeah. I want to ask more about your process. Let's say you have your note cards there. Do you go to a script? Do you start typing?
Go to a script. Well, I'm all for avoiding going to script for as long as possible. So you don't want script to be the time of discovery for anything but dialogue. Okay. So there doesn't have to be any dialogue on my note cards, but every action and character development and even deciding what the skin is, you know, putting the Millennium Falcon into your note cards on that last pass. Mm-hmm. what the frosting is, that needs to be in the note cards, because you don't want to be sitting there writing out a scene and going, there is a missing piece, and it really needs to be there, and I didn't do it first time around. That means you did your notes wrong. because what, if anything, you should say, this is locked down way too tight, and I need to put some deception into this scene to throw people off of the plot. Mm-hmm. See what I mean? That's a lot easier to do than trying to find the plot at the script phase.
I see.
So you want kind of all of the, this is me, this is how I write. I want all of the mystery taken out of it so that I know the beginning, middle, and end. And I know it's responsible, and I know it works, and I know it's good. Mm-hmm. Then you're ready to go to script. And so when I'm writing the script, it's so easy.
So it's sort of like creating a scaffolding for which, I mean, there's always the metaphor of some writers are architects and some are gardeners.
Yeah.
In this case, it would be you have a very strong foundation, and then you can let the story express itself through things like dialogue.
Yeah. I'm an architect before the script, and I'm a gardener after. So okay. The thing is, like, I don't know what the characters are going to say when I go to script, and I let them live, and then they surprise me. Like, all the humor is put on after the outline phase. So while I'm writing the story, I go, I know these characters. These are funky people. They're going to do something funny. I don't know when it's going to happen, but holy cow, look what he just did. So that is a surprise to me. But the why that thing exists in the story is dictated by at the note card phase.
I see.
So the reason why he's having the conversation with the girl in the backseat of the car at this point in the film or the story is because it has to be there right now. I don't know what they're going to say and what they're going to do. I know by the end they have to break up.
Okay.
I don't know how they're going to break up. That's when the characters show up, and maybe he's too quiet, and she's saying, like, you never talk, you don't communicate. Or he's too loud, and she says, you're too rude. You're a rude person. That's when the characters show up and tell you kind of who they are. I know they're going to break up. And I know that this character is a quiet guy. I don't know exactly how he's going to drive her crazy, you know. Mm-hmm.
It's sort of, well, for anyone listening, I'm cheating because I've had the pleasure of seeing your thumbnails and seeing how you develop them.
Yeah.
When you go from script then to thumbnails to finished pencils, how do you dictate the shape of your panels? What goes into them?
Yeah, that's okay. So similar to the outline phase, there is a boring necessary structure I must draw first, and then I can innovate once the clarity and bases are covered. Mm-hmm. So those thumbnails that you saw where, I'll take a 3x5 card and trace it down on the back of a script page and pencil in. I know roughly this is going to be, say, a 6-panel page or a 2-panel page or a 5-panel page, depending on how much dialogue is there, how much interest is there. I don't want to ever have a page be a waste in a book. So there has to be some amount of content that is important that it exists. Mm-hmm. Once that's covered, I can go in and break up these little, like, Mike Mignola will do a panel and just put a leaf in it. You can do that after the thumbnails are done, because the thumbnails say this is what has to be there, and you can say, oh, there's a lot of room at the top. I think I'll throw a little gag in, or I'll throw an inset panel here, or I'll break the panel borders here. You know what I mean?
That's awesome.
It's I always go, and what's weird is people see my work as being fantasy, weird, strange, but at the same time, they can't explain why across 20 books there is a big sweeping philosophy coming out that is entirely intentional. And you don't get that by sitting at your table and saying, I'm going to be weird. Mm-hmm. I just don't think that, I don't think you can sustain if you sustain a career, I'm going to be weird, just, do octopus porn.
There's so many questions. All right, so I'm getting another reinforcement of what you're saying with the architect.
Yeah.
When you compose your pages, then you do a lot of key panels, and then you sort of create the supporting panels around it, pacing, shape. Okay.
That's right.
As far as production goes, let me think if there's more. Man, you have to forgive me because I'm looking at all my
Yeah.
notes here, and there's so many different
The bigger
directions.
philosophy I'm talking about is on at every phase. It is art, so architecture or scaffolding first, and then it still has to be, decorated and beautiful, and that can also play in and reflect off your structure. And so that also goes for when you're paying bills and running a business. You pay rent first. At the end
I
of the
see.
day, you see how much money's left over to go to the movies or buy candy. You eat your meat first before dessert. You outline your structure before you write the script. You write the script, so they're all, even at every phase. It's the same way, about spotting blacks in inking. You spot the blacks to hold the page down and put the structure in. You don't just equally detail everything all at once. You have to make sure that you've covered you got to make sure that you've covered large black areas. So you decisively go and put them in. Then you know, oh, I don't have to put so much detail over here. This thing's already held down and solid.
I would think that it takes an immense amount of experience to come to that. Did you do this when you were starting out? Did you know this? Like what you're describing is a hierarchy.
Yeah.
That I imagine would only come to someone with a lot of experience. But
yeah, it's I knew it in theory coming out of college, and then I've done it wrong so many times and seen, and I'll still break those rules on myself. It doesn't mean I'm perfectly implementing everything, or I'd be writing Moby Dick by now. So I'm just saying, I still have a lot to learn on the execution of the philosophy. We both know more. We probably both know more than what we're putting on the page.
I see. Yeah, of
We're
course.
we have higher ideals and philosophy than what's coming out in our story. So the problem then is our work ethic or our discipline or our learning or whatever. There's some other problem going on besides believing, or as we all believe the right thing, but we're still totally capable of telling 100 lies a day, even though lying is wrong. So you can have the right head knowledge of something. It's very different. It's very difficult to walk what your head knowledge believes.
The minute to minute. Yeah. On that note, tools, and I wanted to ask you about your tools and what you enjoy doing the most in the process of drawing a page.
Sure.
What kind of pencils do you prefer?
I use these. I use a Pentel. It's a yellow ochre colored technical pen. I use a size 0.9, 0.9 millimeter Pentel.
Oh, that's big.
Yeah, and I learned this from. I started using this on Earthworm Jim. This was Mike Dietz, the animation director, had us use. He used it, and so we just all followed him. But he wanted the thickest lead because there's never a reason to go more detailed than that ever. It just isn't.
This was Earthworm Jim, the game, as you were drawing cells?
Yeah, we drew all the animation pencil on paper, then scanned it in.
Okay.
And so the idea is that you wanted a sharp bunch of lead at a click, and you have lead.
I see.
Instead of doing
for shading.
Instead of a pencil sharpener or anything else like that. It was just like, how quick can you get a line? And I just ended up using it from then on.
I was actually talking to Matt Weldon yesterday about this.
Yeah.
And one of the most interesting things that I think you could learn about yourself and, well, myself, is what kind of strokes do you make? Like handwriting, they say you could learn a lot about a person.
Yeah.
Do you feel that you have a heavy hand?
Yes. Okay. And I have way too heavy of a hand. It's blocking in. And I also believe that our signature is a lot like our personality, right? So it's bull in a china shop. It's loud. It's irreverent. It is not terribly skilled. It's bold. It's daring. It's creative. It can be stupid. Yeah. When I see Matt and other people, or Elliot Fernandez, another guy with a real light touch, I just go like, dude, I could never get a Pentel brush pen to do what he does. the thin line, the control.
Long strokes I've noticed too.
Yeah.
And I mean, maybe this isn't true in all cases, but after talking to Weldon yesterday, he seems very easygoing and
Yeah.
confident. And I was telling him my strokes are very anxious, short, and heavy,
Yeah.
like a squirrel or something.
Yeah.
So
He's sweeping. His line. And it does say a lot about him. It looks, I mean, his art looks like, his personality.
well, I
Loves
think
beauty, clearly loves beauty, So do you, I think, in your line. I can tell that. You like filigree and interest.
Well, get embarrassed. As for techniques and favorite artists, who did you admire when you were training, and who do you look at now as people that you want to study from?
I mean, first of all, I needed to be the best me there is, because I'm nowhere near what I should be doing. The guys that I think I could best incorporate into my stuff that wouldn't break my style, would be a Will Eisner. I think he's cartoony. I'm trying to head toward the same thing he is, maybe. It's not perfect. Another guy that I really, and I tend to admire artists that come out of animation. So, Pierre Allary, Alary, he does this Belladone book. Cool. And Sinbad, mostly European artists, but he's done animation for Disney before. And I tend to like animators because their drawings have better acting. If you look at even Kirby stuff, it just looks like a head, and like he didn't even consult with the dialogue writer. And the characters often, the Marvel factory often, even before it was written, they would talk about what the characters were saying, but they didn't have specific dialogues. They'd give them a bunch of heads, and then they'd have to go in and write the dialogue after. That is stupid.
That's sort of the American style is, when you pass the job between people, there's a lot of compartmentalization that happens by accident.
Yeah, but some of them force the script to be done first, so that you can actually draw a character emoting to what is being said instead of make something up.
And that's
and
great.
Hope. So I think there was in comics in mainstream American. I'm talking about DC and Marvel. I think there was not a great tie where what was written, the character would erupt and say it, and it was all over his face when he said it. It was often just like have like a mouth closed, even though they were talking.
Yeah, very static.
Yeah, that's okay. I mean, it's one way of doing it, and they were able to knock out a lot of work. But the guys that I like that come out of animation, they would never do that. You'd never animate something before you got the dialogue and the acting done. You read the script, and you hear the voice record, and you see how the character's emoting, and then you put that just real exaggerated all over his face with two-dimensional clarity, so that someone 30 feet away could tell what's happening at a thumbnail.
Yeah,
that's more and so there's a lot of guys that follow that discipline. Jeff Smith, Bone, Bill Watterson, Calvin and Hobbes, even Andy, the guy that Frazetta, when he did his comics, guys like that did comics, and they just real flamboyant acting is what I like. And people look at my characters and say, he's not the best artist in the world, but that character, I believe him, there's a soul rolling around in his head.
Well, there is, when you say soul, I mean life in general. You can say these characters are, when they emote with body language, there's something that, like, what do they call it? The mirror reflex. Even babies have the mirror reflex. So if you smile at a baby, they don't know what smiling is, but they'll smile. So when I read a comic where someone, I don't know, gets out of the shower and they feel really refreshed, I feel refreshed.
Yeah. And that's empathy. That is really the only job we really have to do as a comic. Structure, screw structure. if you can get someone to feel something when they look at your work, you're casting that spell. And just like a baby can't help but smile and doesn't know why he's smiling, sometimes they'll feel things with your story they didn't know they had the capacity to feel.
Man, I think
that's amazing. You're manipulating human emotion, probably our strongest core, rage, empathy, fear, sadness, romance. To me, morality is the highest, but I'm just saying everything that we feel, if you just put a few scribbles down and you get them to laugh, man, I love making people laugh with my comics.
The best compliment I've ever been given is somebody who would say, like, I was sick or I was feeling depressed and I read one of your comics. Comics, on one hand, you can say they're just like silly little things, but they can touch people at the very, very deepest parts of their soul. It's so profound.
One of my favorite comics is Crazy Cat and Ignat's Mouse. Mm-hmm. Little scratchy pen and ink drawings from 1918 that the Hearst Paper Corporation put out about this weird little cat who's in love with a mouse, and the mouse is in love with Officer Pup, and Officer Pup is in love with the cat. It's a love triangle. They love each other, and they throw bricks at each other's heads and stuff like that. Mm. But he's going like, give me your hand. I'm going to take you into another world. He takes you to, it is a Crazy Cat and Ignat's Mouse is probably the weirdest planet I've ever visited. Maybe the only thing weirder is like Eraserhead, but it is so consistent. It has its own language. He has his own iconography. It's an amazing world. And by the way, that was also what inspired Bill Watterson. That was his number one, was Crazy Cat and Ignat's Mouse.
That's a really interesting coincidence, because I remember even Schultz was saying that he was inspired by those guys. And you can, of course, see the DNA from Ignatz to Schultz to Watterson and onward.
It is world building 101.
It's so cool.
And for him to put your head in that place is quite a spell.
Yeah, I mean, reading a good comic is sort of like visiting another world. It's like a vacation or something.
Yeah.
It can be as mundane as putting down marks on a piece of paper, or it can be as deep as a life-changing event.
Yeah. And Crazy Cat's not like trying to end slavery or something, He just wants to give you a fun time on one page.
But that can be
so a comic can do that, and there's nothing wrong with that either. No. If you're having fun. I think most comics even fail at that, even at just showing you a good time. Most comics I pick up and read them, I just go, why did you even make this? Mm-hmm. These characters are terrible. The story is terrible. And you're just going through the motions, You told yourself to make a comic. And so you're making this. It's like manual labor.
There's a certain feeling. I give every comic a few pages to hook me, but I think after that, it's their responsibility to get me interested.
I agree. If you give them a shot and they don't do it, mm-hmm. So to me, if I buy a 24-page comic and you haven't hooked me, you're terrible at what you do.
The first few pages, that's a whole hour on itself, I'm sure. Like being able to hook a reader. Good art is helpful, but I've actually found that my whole reading career, some stories, like there's a Jeffrey Brown. Have you ever heard of him as a cartoonist?
What did he do?
Very scratchy alternative comics, indie comics, like I'm Going to Be Small. He did a bunch of Star Wars, Little Leia, Funny Misshapen Body. Anyway, it's very scratchy looking, and the art is by I don't want to insult him, but it's not the greatest, most deepest art, but his stories.
I like those guys too, by the way. Terrible artists, and they're just going for all written content.
Well, what's cool about it is that the story I don't know, there's something in the panels or something, it just gets me. It makes me want to
Yeah.
keep reading. So I've noticed, I have a little theory of mine that even if the most brilliantly painted comic in the world was converted to stick figures, I would still be bored reading it. Whereas a well-made story, as
That's
stick
right.
figures, would still be fun to read.
I mean, that's Mao's is barely more than stick figures. It's one of the, and one of the Pulitzers, it's one of the greatest stories ever written. In fact, I think that's why a lot of comics are poorly drawn, even because they're saying, look at the writing, not the art.
Yeah.
Deliberately drawn bad. So falling in that category would be Simpsons, South Park, Family Guy, Bob's Burgers, deliberate bad drawings because the content is, they're saying it's the writing. And I think that came from political cartoons. If you look at the New Yorker, from 20 years ago, the characters were like all stylized, and I think if they did drawings that were as good as, say, Scrooge McDuck or something, or Uncle Scrooge or whatever, that adults would think it was kid art, is where I think ugly art came from. I think it was so that American adults could get into it more. That they didn't think they were seeing some kiddie art.
I wonder what the
Notice
difference...
that you never see like high-end great Warner Brothers or Disney animation for adults.
But it does exist in Japan.
Yeah.
I've always been puzzled by
Yeah.
this.
Japan, it's a different culture.
Yeah.
I would say Japan's culture is way more visual oriented, right?
Yeah.
If you look at their feng shui, if you look at their ponds, if you look at their buildings and structures, if you look at their fine art, it's just way more nature oriented. And it's probably from a Buddhist influence going all the way back. America is an idea and a contract. We're a written country. So I think we're coming late to visuals.
Oh, that's really profound, actually. I got to think about that. Because if you look at old art from Japan, it's even the old prints that they used to do, scrolls. Yeah, you're right. You're actually right.
Yeah, even their written language or pictures.
Yeah, that's true.
So I'm just saying they have a much older grasp of visual and text, and we're kind of new to it.
Okay. Well, that doesn't mean we don't have room to grow in that direction.
Oh, we only have room to grow in that direction. It's why kind of the Europeans are right about the ugly American, is that we've always been like, yeah, we're illiterate and we like hot dogs. It's like hot dogs and baseball and NASCAR.
Yeah.
It's like that's okay. That's who we are, But it's going to start making sense why graphic novels, why manga is so explosive in Japan compared to here. That was a form of literature for their adults way before literature became or comics became a form of adults. We grew up. I shouldn't say we grew up. It's weird too, because for Americans who still love Spider-Man, they're loving something they liked in the 4th grade. Whereas the Japanese, when they love manga, they're loving literature that adults read. They're not trying to relive their 4th grade.
I see. So
they're allowed to grow up and still read comics. Americans remain perpetual adolescents, and our comics don't grow up with us. That's
really deep. They're reliving childhood memories and not jumping into new.
Yeah. For America, it's nostalgia. For Japan, it is a legit art medium that stands on its own.
Okay. I do think I'm optimistic about it changing in the next generation or so. When I guess my people, when I was in high school, when we're fully, whatever, we're older, and then we keep reading this stuff. It's not new to us. It's not novel, and we know that it's for adults. When I was even a teenager, I read Berserk, and I shouldn't have, but
I've got that right here. By the way, my son, my 12-year-old son, was going through it, going, Dad, why did you buy this book? What is this? He was curious. He was kind of making a moral statement, like, why would you have Berserk? And I go, son, you can look at that, but it's not for you.
That's true. Yeah. I mean, there is, man, I don't want to go down the rabbit hole. I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
But there is so much room to grow, and I'm so happy that it's going in that direction. I wish it would go faster.
Yeah. It
And
just takes a
I
long
wish there weren't
time.
so many obstacles. One of the things I want to ask is, as far as the future of whatever it is we're doing,
Yeah.
how many years do you think it'll take before it matures to a point where it's where there's more of a, not a golden age necessarily, but more artists will be able to sustain themselves and readers will be able to find the books they want?
That is a wrong question or wrong goal,
Mhm.
because it doesn't by necessity have to become a living before it's legit.
Okay.
So that's the, I think the bigger question is, and it will always be changing, right? So 50 years from now, it will have developed in a direction. I don't know what it'll be or where we'll be. You know what I mean?
Yes.
It's kind of like, where do you think communication will be 50 years from now? If you asked a friend in the 60s, they're
Sure.
like,
Sure.
well, Trump will be the represent American communication on Twitter in the presidency. And you just go, wow, I didn't see that coming.
So there's just no way to know.
There's no way to know. I do know that with more people coming in, with printing being cheaper, with more people experimenting and being comfortable, with the kids breaking into manga,
Mhm.
for being voracious about it, it will only get bigger. It will only be more saturated, and then the market difficulties will always be there for any artist,
Mhm.
because it doesn't have to be there in the future. And I don't mourn if it left us, because something else will come up. Like the idea that you and I aren't sitting here going, how do we get kids carving 18-foot tall marble statues of Michelangelo's David? Where's that going to be in 20 years? How do we get that?
Mhm.
We need to get that back. We have no interest in getting that back
I
because we're
see.
wrong. And we're worried about comics. I think it's a far greater vacuous hole in our society that we're not learning to draw the classic human figure. And it used to be like every student was learning. If you go to the Louvre, there's thousands of artists you've never heard of that carve marble out of stone, as well, carve Davids out of marble as well as Michelangelo.
Mhm.
There's thousands of marble statues there, and you're going, where did these people go? And why are they all anonymous? And why isn't this our goal? No, we need to make more Family Guy.
So it's the storytelling. Storytelling will always exist as long as our species is here.
Yeah, yeah,
Just we don't know what the form will be.
yeah. This year, next year, a couple of years within our lifetime, there'll be still lots of comics. There'll be a shot at making a living, but no one was guaranteed a living, even when you were amazing at carving people out of marble.
Right.
And you can be an amazing comic book. I would imagine Bernie Wrightson, one of the greatest artists to ever walk through comics, probably struggled to pay rent at some point.
That's a very hard truth. That part of the things that I always try to address. And I won't keep you much longer. I know you got to go soon.
Yeah.
I always want to try to encourage people, but the hard truth is, like what you just said, talent and marketing are very different things.
Yeah, and I'm saying, is not the art form legit enough for you to do it, even if it's at a loss?
Yeah.
If you love it, do you only play piano to be a famous musician,
Mhm.
or only to make money as a teacher? Or is not playing the piano a great thing in and of itself? We respect it in and of itself. I respect comic artists that are great at comics, even if no one shows up, because maybe the whole audience is so illiterate that they'll never recognize something great. Like Melville's Moby Dick, that did not sell out of its first print run in his lifetime.
Yeah.
5,000 copies did not sell out in his lifetime because the
Nobody
audience
cared about
wasn't.
Van Gogh
Yeah,
when he was alive.
the audience wasn't ready for it.
Hmm.
So that doesn't mean you shouldn't make what you make just because the audience doesn't show up. If you know you're doing something beautiful, you ought to do it. And to ask, can I make a living at it, might be the wrong question.
You're right. It's how many books can I make regardless of how I make my living.
That's me, sucker. That is me. I'm 53. I've got, say, 20 years left in me. I got to do at least one book, maybe 2 books a year. I'll pull off 20 to 40 more books, and that's all I'm going to have to say about comics.
A couple more
I hope I can trick
questions.
the world into giving me a living in the meanwhile.
Well,
But it won't stop me from making comics. I might have to go be a
right.
barista or a teacher. I'll have to be a teacher. But I'll still do a comic a year.
It's a labor of love. I was saying this, I think, to Weldon yesterday, or one of the guys I was talking to. It's like romance. I would rather read a book that is made with agony and scraping together time. It's a beautiful romance as opposed to just kissing someone mechanically, and it's
Yeah.
like, okay, I love you, and those words, it just means nothing.
Yeah.
I want to experience the passion, the agony of creating a story. Someone that needed to tell this story.
Yeah.
That's so meaningful to me.
And I would, that's what I challenge artists to do, is pick a story that you have to tell.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter if nobody gets it. Like, should To Kill a Mockingbird not exist if no one's ever heard of it? Because I assume there's lots of great works and great art and great stories and great songs that we don't know of, simply because popular culture didn't grasp it. But, popular culture makes Sausage Factory, or Sausage Party.
Yeah.
And then we look at that and go, that's what I'm supposed to be doing, because I don't want to work as a barista. I want the money. Then go make porn and make your bloodbath. And there's a bunch of people that want that stimulation, porn and a bloodbath. And there's room for that too in this medium. But that's not what makes me tick. And that's not, I don't think it's the highest ideal or respect we can show to this art form, because I think we're all kind of underperforming in music, art, animation, especially film. I just don't think film has come anywhere near close to living up to its charter. It's a new medium, so it's got a long way to go. But, what should you be making with where you're at? What should you be tweeting? Mm-hmm. What should you be posting? What should you be saying, thinking, drawing, writing? You come to your art table with those thoughts, and you have a real good chance of blowing the ceiling off. That's exciting.
It makes me think of, and we can end with this too. We've done an hour.
Okay.
The art that I think is the most valuable to our species in general, that's what I try to think about, is what is going to speak across generations, across time, space, across language. If I showed something like a piece of art to a caveman, they would still get it. Something that'll move them. I think that's what the highest art can be. And I would, I don't know. It's a little.
Yeah, I don't believe the truth changes. The truth does not change. So if it's true, it was wrong to rape 2,000 years ago, and it will be wrong to rape 2,000 years from now. That's true. So why is your story only popular now, and no one in their right mind should read it 100 years from now?
I mean, that really is, I think, at the core of what we've been talking about. What stories are going to still be read and enjoyed 100 years from now, and what's just a flash in the pan now? That's something I think about all the time.
Why do I still read Moby Dick in my jaw? I can't believe what I'm reading.
And it gets better every time you read it.
It gets better every time. G.K. Chesterton, his philosophy is so true. It's truer today than it was 110 years ago when he put it down. Imagine writing 11,000 essays that are truer 100 years from now than they are today.
Yeah.
That's, I think that's worth doing, even if no one shows up. It would be a shame if no one showed up. I think we're lucky to have Twitter and YouTube and marketing to bet. So we have a little more control over getting our message out, and then the rest is up to the market and the people, if what they choose to read or not. But I'm not going to let them dictate what I do. That would be stupid.
No. I mean, maybe they're just jealous because they can't do that. They don't know how. But having this conversation now, I'm so pumped. I want to do this stuff now. I want to make art. I hope everyone else listening feels the same. Is there anything else you want to talk about or plug before we go?
Oh, just back Earthworm Jim on Kickstarter. It closes on Sunday.
Absolutely.
I'd love to send you a beautiful book. There's an exclusive Alejandro print that will not be available after the campaign. And bigger is, what I'm saying to all artists and writers. You may say, oh, he just wants to make me disappear in obscurity, being an artsy fartsy guy that doesn't care about money. That's not true. It's actually, I think your job is life and death. That putting truth into culture and telling stories is one of the greatest things you can do, that I don't think you're a freak or a lunatic that ought to be considered pushed on the outskirts of society. That I think actually what you do is as important as laying brick on a building and building proper roads and observing proper business practices. I think it's actually much higher than how you're treated. I think it's more important than you think.
I think the word that I was looking up was ikigai, something like that. It's like the Japanese idea of putting your whole soul into whatever you're doing, even if it's cutting sushi.
Yep.
But man, I have to thank you so much. I'm so inspired now after talking to you. I hope everyone feels the same. I hope we could talk again soon.
Yeah, anytime.
All right, I'll be ordering my Earthworm Jim this weekend. I hope everyone else does the same. Thanks so much, Doug, for talking to me.
Yeah, thanks to my backers, and thanks for having me on. This is a good conversation. Anytime, anywhere, man. And thanks for helping me out on Earthworm Jim. I appreciate that.
You got it. Anytime. Thank you so much for talking.
Yes.